What's up, everyone? It's 2 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon, which means you're tuning into Cannabis Legalization News. I'm producer Lauren, and today we're going to be speaking with Jehan Gordon-Booth. She is one of the 4 women who crafted the incredible Illinois legalization bill, which is scheduled to take place in January 1st, 2020. But first, let's get into a little bit of cannabis legalization news. What's going on?
I tell you, it was Donald Trump doing it again when he just pushed legalization news right off the map by doing something terribly inappropriate. But there's a Senate and a House committee vote today or this week on the Safe Banking Act. But, you know, the biggest news is now, Jehan, thank you so much for coming on and for helping to pass this law and to draft it. The application's coming out next week. How do you think it's going to go? Oh, you're on, Jehan. Can you hear us?
Jehan, can you hear us?
Hopefully, Jehan can hear us. Oh no, are we having? You can't hear me. That's not good. Miggy, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right, Lauren, can you? All right, John, you're back. Can you hear us?
Oh no.
Oh man. Well,
you know, we can sign. We'll do a little sign.
Let's see. Let's take her off.
All right. Let's see if she can come back into the studio.
Hey, Jehan, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Oh, cool.
Right. We're back.
All right.
I cannot hear Tom.
Oh.
You still can't hear me.
Tom, you're not special. I'll just talk to Jehan first.
I see his lips moving, but I don't hear anything.
But so Tom,
oh. He's re-entering the studio. Let's see.
So Jehan, Tom was he was asking you about the upcoming applications.
Oh wow.
Can you guys hear me now? Can anybody hear me?
I can hear you.
Jehan, can you hear me?
Oh my gosh, I still can't.
Oh my God. It's ridiculous. I can't believe we can't talk to each other. The legalization.
This is going to be fun on YouTube right now. Just all the switching.
All right. Can everybody hear me now?
I can hear you fine.
I can hear you.
Okay. I had to turn it on and turn it off again. Jehan, what do you have to say about this law that's going to have an application next week?
This was a labor of love. It took an incredibly long time to get this done. We worked on this for about 3 years. We traveled around the country to try and find best practices, things that people were doing right, things that folks were doing wrong. To be quite honest with you, Illinois had a gold standard as it relates to a medical program in terms of their tracking process from seed to seal. We are considered within the industry. We are considered the gold standard. And again, in medical, as it relates to preventing leakage, what we did not have a medical program that was reflective of the community. And so with that being said, what we did was we crafted a recreational cannabis policy that was incredibly equity centered around principles that were incredibly important to myself and the other 3 sponsors.
Now, I wanted to ask about the social equity aspect. Where are some of these social equity applicants going to be living if we don't have the map for it?
The map's coming. The map's coming. So just because the application hits on October 1, it's not due October 1. It just is live October 1.
Right.
The application won't be due for some time. And you will know, I had a conversation with the CEO today about something not germane to this issue, but this came up, and they are on the precipice of releasing that within days.
That would be awesome.
Jehan, where did you, for your points, how did this group of amazing women coming up with the actual recreational program? What was your input? What made you guys, veterans, minorities? How did you map that out?
So it was, I would say we embarked on what I would call a pretty inclusive process. So my engagement, so Kelly and Heather introduced the bill 3.5, 4 years ago. And I got engaged because this cannabis legalization bills have always been around, but a bill is just a bill.
Right.
But I know Kelly and I work together on a number of different issues. I've helped her, she's helped me, and I know her to be a serious legislator. I also know Heather to also be a serious legislator. So I approached Kelly 3.5 years ago from the standpoint that I wanted to engage in this process from an equitable standpoint, wanting to make sure that this industry was reflective of the entirety of Illinois. I mean, so many of if you look at our procurement process at the state level, it is not inclusive of of the demographics of the state. And so I have been very clear and very intentional and very unapologetic that I wanted to make sure I came to the table with a couple of issues. I wanted to make sure that people had the ability to expunge their records. I wanted to make sure that there were people of color that looked like me, that had an ownership stake in the industry, particularly because Black and brown communities were the communities that were ravaged by the war on drugs for the last 80 years. So that was my angle from the very beginning, and I've never been bashful about why I wanted to be at the table, and that's what I fought for.
And I think that put it over the top. But then I wanted to ask, like, I understand that you didn't write it just like for Black and brown people to get into the industry, because we had discussed earlier that might have drawn some type of constitutionality challenge. How did you structure the social equity applicant status to get around that type of racial bias issue that may come up legislatively?
I mean, so obviously, any policy that you write, if you want it to be able to stand up in court of law, you have to be able to stand up to strict scrutiny. So we did not, as it relates to the actual policy, it's all race neutral. So the language is all race neutral. But the language, what it does speak specifically to our communities, like disproportionately impacted areas. It speaks to more broad concepts than actually race.
Right.
It really gets to it off. If you want to look at sort of what the thread is, it really gets to what happened during the war on drugs and communities that were impacted by the war on drugs. Certainly those are not only Black and brown communities, but primarily Black.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, what comes. But we wanted to structure the law in a way that, number one, was legal, that could stand up in a court of law, but
Right.
two, that got to the intention that we were looking to get to, which is something that is reflective of the entirety of the state. Because when you go to other states, so one of the things that happened as we were traveling and meeting with folks around the country, almost no state has a market that is reflective of, number one, other than Vermont, everyone else did this through ballot measure, right?
Correct.
So you take a small paragraph, throw it on the ballot, cannabis, yes, no. Well, those of us that are on this podcast, well, we all know, guess what? People like cannabis.
Yep.
And people voted yes for it.
Yes, they do.
But the reality of it is that when you legalize cannabis through that measure, what you don't have the ability to do is you don't have the ability to be intentional from a policy perspective. And when you are crafting a policy, you are allowed to make policy considerations about the things that you think are important. And so, other than Vermont, which is incredibly homogenous, Illinois is not. Illinois is incredibly diverse. We are the first state of our ilk that did this through the legislative process, which is why our bill is 610 pages.
Yep.
Yeah. I think you should be especially proud of the social equity aspect of that bill, like being the only state that did that. That's a huge statement. Everybody else is playing catch up with you. Here in Washington, they just started doing it. I'm like, after 5 years, we're going to start.
Yeah.
See, here's the problem. Like, the market is saturated at this point. And so that's why, if you want to, sure, it's like anything is better than nothing, right? So I won't say that it doesn't mean anything. I will never say that. But what I believe firmly is, markets are markets. I don't care if we're talking about cannabis, it doesn't matter. Like, it's going to be so much more difficult to do once the market is already saturated. So we did a demand study back in February, and basically the current market will only be able to meet about 45% of the demand.
Do you have a copy of that study?
I do not.
Dang, because that would be one of those nice links that we like to share so people can read it.
I'll see if I can find it for you.
Cool.
Yeah, no, because you kind of designate the whole the lower income areas. I mean, you're kind of guaranteed like to hit the people that you're trying to help out. You know, Tom wrote an awesome article. What was that last week, Tom? Where you talk about the barrier?
That was my month for the Cannabis Law and Regulation Reporter article. So my next one I just submitted last week, and I can't already remember what it is because this industry moves so fast. But I think it's excellent in the sense that, you know, when I got these guys on the line, I have to tell them like, well, tell me about your social equity talent. And it's creating such a search right now for people that have been arrested for cannabis. Because that's the only one that I can tell them for certain that one qualifies. I'm like, give me the rap sheet. Okay, this is a social equity applicant. But now once
or anyone in their family.
Or and then I tell them that's generational, like, so maybe not them, maybe their parents, maybe their kids. But, or, you know, if it's a ne'er-do-well cousin, that's your dependent. No, I don't think brother was in there like that. The member of related family. Okay, I'm going to review it because just like Bernie Sanders, you wrote the dang bill, you know? Yeah. And so like, I'm not going to sit here and say, I remember.
All of this stuff, like when I tell you, I've never spent so much time working on anything other than maybe my child and my marriage and my life. I've never spent this much time on any one issue ever. And it still consumes my day.
Well, yeah, but like I told you, I think that, you know, and I thanked you so much for doing it. And it opened doors for me to get back into this industry. I mean, that's how I met Miggy 10 years ago when I wrote that book. But now I'm able to do it. And I've met so many other people that want to get into this industry too. So like, what's that?
I need to read your book.
Okay, I'll get you one. Next time I see you out at one of the fundraisers, I hear there's one tonight. But you know, it's not just the industry, it's also the ancillary industries, and all these people are now going to get jobs, and they're going to be able to pay taxes. And so like when you look at the revenue number, that revenue number is there, but that's like crust stuff on the whole pie. I mean, it's these other things that are coming as well from the industry, and all these businesses that are forming right now, and they're trying to win this lottery, and they need to have social equity talent to win it. I'm like, and so you know,
and the points, the social equity points are so much that you can't leave them on the board. Like if you want, if you want to win an application, and that was like I fought for that strongly in this policy, right? Because oftentimes, I mean, I've been around a little while at this point. Whether it's the state, the city, the county, you know, oh, we care about diversity, so you'll get 2.5 points, you know, if you have 2.5 points out of 200 points, if you know, have like a diverse package that you can be able to put together. And it's so few points that people just like, okay, you know, I'm gonna make sure every other area is tight. Hang on a second.
Right. Because like the veteran owned one is kind of like that in the sense that there's only like 2 points, well, not 2 points, 2%, like 5 points for getting if it's a veteran owned, but that's not like enough. Like you'd still get a 98% score on that test if you're looking at like that. However, without the social equity talent, you're looking at an 80% score. So like right there, you're done. You're taking a hit.
And you can stick a fork in it because you're done.
That's right. And then so I can't wait to get the map because then I can advise clients as to like, well, where do you live? I don't have that opportunity yet to say like, well, where do you live? I can guess. I can estimate.
The good thing is nobody has it. So you're not at a disadvantage.
True.
Nobody has it, one. But number two, there are certain communities that you absolutely know are going to be in the map. They just are, right? Like, so where we live, you know, anything in 61605 is going to be in the map.
There you go. Right? But like, that's one of the things about it though. I'm wondering, I'm going to get this map, and are there just going to be large absent spaces on the map that correspond to where the corn is?
Say it again.
This disproportionately impacted area map, will that just be like a chart of basically only inner cities, or like if you get into rural areas, will there be any disproportionately impacted areas?
That's above my pay grade.
So you started you created the legislation, and who's creating the zoning areas?
DCEO.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a department?
Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity.
Oh,
that's right.
Got you.
Yep.
And then I had one question for you in particular. When the bill in home grow and the lack of, what was the thinking behind that?
Law enforcement. That was a gift to law enforcement. We wanted home grow in. The reality of it is that there's still a lot of myths surrounding cannabis, and we had a fight to get the small amount of home grow that we have for medical patients. It's just the reality of it is, I think it's like a lot of other things that we're just going to have to deal with. This is a brand new industry. All of us that are in this space and leaned in this way, we really truly are like all of us. We're like the pioneers of this, you know, and maybe in 10, 15 years, we'll look like geniuses. Maybe we'll look like we're crazy. But I do believe we're not going to look crazy. We're going to look back and be like, wow, they were talking about this all the way back in 2019.
Oh, we were talking about it in 2010, but like, yeah.
in a way that's legal.
Right. Right. And that's another.
But the reality of it is that when I hear people talk about, you know, this was passed in a vacuum, bull. That is not true. Everybody had a voice at the table. I can't tell you how many disagreements came about, but we worked through those issues. But the lack of home grow was a give to IML and law enforcement, because they were going to be adamantly opposed, which it felt like they were anyways.
Mm-hmm.
If there was any amount of home grow recreationally, so that's something that we can come back on.
Yeah, that's really right. You get through the door, and then you just try to fix everything afterwards. You know, like with the banking bill, the argument against the banking bill is we want more. Well, how about we just have the fucking banking bill first, and then we can get, you know, progress on forward from there. Right. You know,
yeah, because like right now, the thing that we have doesn't work at all. So let's try this, see if it works, and then at least we've started doing something.
Yeah. Common sense is a superpower.
Oh, yeah. I'm just glad that we're bringing it to Illinois. Hey, but the third type of social equity applicant is one that has 10 full-time current employees, 51% of which are either in a disproportionately impacted area or were arrested for cannabis. How does that work if I'm a startup? So like if I'm a startup and I'm putting together my business plan for my application, and I promise the state, like by the time I open my doors, you know, we're going to do job fairs and expungement seminars to promote our community and staff our business so that on day one, we are a social equity applicant. Am I going to get the points for that?
So my suggestion would be that you not try and reinvent the wheel. You try to partner with organizations that are already doing things like that.
Mm-hmm.
You partner with groups that are already doing things like that. So you don't have to always reinvent the wheel. You don't have to necessarily. I'm not a lawyer, so don't invite, you know. But let me tell you the way I interpret that, and let me tell you what the intent is. That there is intentionality. There is intentionality around the folks that are in this industry actually giving a damn about the very people and the very communities that have been devastated by cannabis for the last 80 years. And so when thinking about that, just think about ways that you can partner. You can actually partner with existing organizations, existing groups that are already doing some of that stuff, and pulling them into your space. Maybe consult with them, work with them, because like, again, you don't have like a huge HR department built out. You won't be able to do all those things, but you find ways to leverage the folks that are doing those things already.
Well, according to the Cannavisor, there was a webinar for the Cannavisors talking about your guys' upcoming, you know, equity program and how to get in there. And they were saying when you apply for this license, you already have to have employees. Like they have to already be on your payroll. You know, that's, you know, already right before you apply. What was it, 20th? Is that your guys' deadline?
No, the application will come out on the 1st, and then it'll be open for 3 months before it's due on the 1st of next year.
Like January.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so you have a bunch of lawyers just saying that, you know, before you get into apply for your application, to have that staff, you can't, you know, say that you're going to do it in the future, or you know, it's already got to be a thing on your payroll.
That's not my interpretation.
Okay.
Well, mine was like, you know, there you go. Do you have a coffee shop that you're currently staffing with 10 full-time employees, 6 of which are this or that? Okay, well, your coffee shop should apply for the cannabis license. And then
that's
they
kind
already
of
have full-time employees. They're already cash flowing. They aren't allowed to sell cannabis. They don't have a license for it.
But Jehan, though, along with the bill, because you offer in that equity is a loan from the state. Is that something that you guys wrote into it, or is that something like where does that money come from?
The money's coming from the current folks that are in medical. There are fees associated with having a license. Just about most license. Licenses, there are fees associated with it. So the fees that are associated with the current folks in medical that essentially will be able to be the first that are supplying the product by January 1. That licensure fee then pays for the cannabis revolving loan equity fund.
So you guys actually have a medical.
As we travel the country, the biggest issues as it related to ensuring that you have a diverse marketplace were issues centered around, and then the biggest issues in Illinois, because we do not have a diverse medical cannabis industry. The biggest issues are, one, with medical, you had to come in day one with all of your real estate. As an equity applicant, you don't have to have real estate. You get 6 months after you gain licensure to be able to get your real estate. So that was the biggest issue, and then capitalization was the other big issue. And so what we were looking to do was to remove barriers that have existed historically to ensure that this is a equitable market.
Yeah, that's what Tom and I were talking about before, was that that boundary, that the equity part, where, you know, someone who comes from a disenfranchised community, I don't have that kind of cheddar sitting around where I'm going to jump into a 200,000 market or whatever to start.
No, it's going to be more than 200,000. I mean, opening up a dispensary in Chicago, $1 million. I mean, downstate Illinois, you could do it for less. But when I'm giving them my clients adequately capitalized advice as to what that means, I mean, I'm telling them, hey, you got to have some cushion. You can't budget this to the nickel, because this is an operation that's large and moving, and things can go wrong, and you need to have something in reserve. So, and I'm also, always looking for the social equity talent, but then I tell them they should still be capitalized, even if they're going to try to go for that money, because it says in the application you have to say if you are or if you're not, but there's no path to obtain that cash yet. That's still getting worked out, right, by the administration department that's handling it.
Yep.
Okay. Interesting.
So what is Cannabis?
That's not
a thing.
That's not a thing.
That's not a thing. No.
Yeah.
No.
I read an article, and I mean, I just don't get why. It's, first off, it's a stupid ass damn title. How aggressive were you about what, a bunch of women stand for common sense, and then you're all of a sudden
Hey, there's so much hypocrisy in the journalistic coverage of cannabis to begin with. So,
but I mean, just okay. But it was only women that stood up for the actual bill.
It was they.
No. Myself, Kelly, Heather, Toy. We were the 4 women that sort of came together and worked on this, not exclusively. I mean, this was a very involved process there are other women and men that worked on this bill, like Representative Sonia Harper, who represents the Inglewood area. She's actually the chairwoman of the Ag Committee in Springfield. Senator L.G. Sims, who is chair of Jude Cram. You have Chairman Justin Slaughter, who chairs Judiciary Crim, and Representative Carol Ammons. There are a number of Representative Bob Morgan, who used to be Quinn's Green Czar, his medical Green Czar, who is now a state rep. Representative Selena Villanueva. So I'm doing a podcast. Please be quiet. Thank you. That's my 5-year-old.
Yeah.
I'm at work. Shit.
Yeah. Me too. Hey, I'm getting calls, man.
There are men and women, but I think that essentially what happened with that whole deal was something amongst an internal friend conversation went external. and
Damn.
we're friends, and so I just leave it at that. But that's not a word, and
Yeah.
you don't have, and that will not be heard ever again. Trust me.
Got you.
You see, and he had to Google you to like research the guest, and then the semester came up. I've just known you for 10 years. I never even looked at it. Yeah.
It should be dead.
Yeah, that was my question. Sorry. That was a Sun Times article that popped up.
That's a mess. That's a mess.
Well,
Yeah.
it's biased. It's biased.
Well, a lot of journalism is biased, and especially like when you read the headlines to a story about cannabis, you know right away, like basically the bias that the journal or the article is going to have. I mean, most of them are like puns about how things go up in smoke or they're hazy.
But I mean, like with a bunch of men.
The reality of it is, this is a serious issue, right?
Right.
This is real business. This is a space that I don't take myself serious, but I take my work very serious. And so I don't ever want a cloud to be put on what it is that I'm doing or what it is that I'm leaning into, because one, I stand at a very, very busy intersection in the game of politics. I'm a downstater, I'm Black, I'm a woman, and I'm a millennial. And so being in that space, a lot of assumptions are already made about me, and I make it my business to poke holes in them all the time. But what I will do though is avail myself to listening to, ideas that others may have that may not necessarily be in complete alignment with me. Listen to them, not agree, process, and then, state where it is that I am. And that doesn't have to be made public. And so that's kind of where I am with this, right? Like this is something that was internal, that became external, that is now dead.
And it's behind us.
Well, like you said, cannabis. Okay.
Well, I wanted to touch base on one more thing before we get to social use, which I find fascinating. But on the diversity of the industry, I was looking at the restrictions regarding the ownership of the numbers of licenses. But like the statute sets a ceiling of dispensaries at 500 over the course of all the waves, and even beyond that, if they just have the maximum of the statute. But then they also talk about how you're only allowed to touch 10 of those licenses. So basically, no one player can own more than 2% of the market. What was your intention in that?
Slow growth model. The only way that you are going to ensure equity in this industry is if you don't allow the people who are already ultra capitalized and have all the money to swallow up all the real estate, et cetera, that have all the stroke already, that have all the money, et cetera. If you don't create an environment that allows regular people to participate, regular people will not be able to participate.
And like the people do complain. They say, "Oh my gosh, they priced me all out." I'm like, no, it's expensive to go into basically any business.
It's still business.
It is.
Right?
And then now, and how expensive is a business if you can't go to a bank and bank it and get a loan? It's even more expensive. And that's why that capital fund was necessary, because that really helps bring down the barriers. But it's still going to be a regulated industry, and businesses are expensive. Opening a restaurant's expensive. Going into business costs money.
This is at the end of the day, exactly. And I think the folks that I believe that are complaining about it, they're not entrepreneurs already.
Right.
Because guys, I am on the phone. I'm on a podcast live. Anyone that knows what it's like to be an entrepreneur knows that it's expensive. Like the idea that you're able to go into, this is $1 billion industry. The upside on this is amazing for anyone who goes into this industry. And so, no, if you don't have a lot of resources, like probably everything else in life, this is going to be somewhat of a challenge. But there is opportunity. So maybe you can't do it alone. Maybe you need to find your brother, find your cousin, find your friend from college, find your sister's girlfriend's brother who is resourced up. Like this is where networks come into play.
Right. It's like such pure capitalism in how you've structured it. And it's open in the sense that I'm like, wow. Because if you look at this, we're on Google's pipes. I mean, like Google owns internet search. Nobody's going to be able to say they own Illinois cannabis. It's going to be a very diverse group and it's accessible. You know, it's not Oklahoma accessible, but we're very controlling with the supply and the diversion of that supply and its tracking and then the revenue capture because we know where every gram is.
Well, putting that stipulation too also prevents, like you said, the medical people just taking over because you already got people, you know, making money and are doing quite well. And now you just staged them to take over the recreational side where now you have to question, like, do I want to jump into both sides?
So think about it. Let's talk about the restrictions that you guys placed on the craft grow overlap with the current players. And
we did that so that the big cultivators couldn't eat up the craft grows. So the craft grow actually was a space where a valuable niche space where people could actually operate. If we did not put those safeguards there, then all that would happen, I mean, this is still capitalism. All that would happen is immediately craft grows would mean nothing because the big boys would gobble them up.
Right. And you've restricted that by that 10% rule, which is a part of the statute I've read a lot, and I'm still confused by it because it's one of those ones with, you know, more than 3, but no less than 5, and you just have to read it a few times. And so if you have 10% or more of one of the cultivation licenses, you can't have any of the craft grow licenses, is how I read that.
Yep, by design.
Yep, they've locked them out and they've opened them up. And then there's a max limit. You can only touch 3 craft grow licenses out of a max in the statute if you open it up and it's fully mature of 150. So you aren't being able to be a McDonald's of craft grows. I mean, if there's only 3 McDonald's in the whole state, it would be a novel thing, you know?
No monopolies.
What do you guys consider a craft grow?
It's square footage.
14,000 and less.
Right. And they start them at 5.
Yep.
Wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I had a guy like who makes the cannabis facilities themselves, like the grow facilities. He did the math in his head. He goes, "Oh, it's about 1,500 plants." I'm like, "How did you do that?" He goes, "Years of practice." Yeah, but then I'm like, "All right, I'm gonna trust you, Mr. Guy who builds cannabis farms. I think you probably know what flowering space translates to in plants."
John, do you plan on getting involved in the industry at all as far as the regulation goes in the future, or pretty much you wanted to open a door and now you're good?
I like policy. I like what I do.
Yeah. I got to say, your history is amazing. I mean, 10 years at 27, what made you think, all right, screw everything, party's over, I'm going to politics?
You know what? So my mother was incredibly involved in the community. And I just remember as a little girl, like, being not without even realizing it, I remember being incredibly impacted by the impact that I saw her have on people's lives. And so when I was in my early 20s and I was thinking about, you know, so what was I going to do with myself? What was I going to do with my life? I knew that I didn't just listen. Money's not a bad thing. Like, no, I'm not taking about poverty out here or anything. But I knew that for me to be happy, I wanted to be dispositive on issues that meant something to me. And so I kind of like, I got into politics without even trying. I was like a lot of women. I got into politics like as a supporter of other politicians. Like, so I got involved in politics, like helping Dave Kaler. I wanted to be like someone who helped good people get elected. I applied to be a part of, at that time, United States Senator Barack Obama's political training program with Emily's List out in DC. So I moved to DC for like a month. I was a part of that with.
That's not moving to DC. I mean, like, you can't say I moved there for a month.
Peoria, who had only been to Peoria and University of Illinois in Champaign.
Wow.
Moving for a week, going to DC for a month. It was like moving.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you're a long
time. month.
Yeah.
So I was very elaborative with what it was. Moved to DC for visited DC for a month. And went to this political training program, and then came back, was working on campaigns, and then the party ended up knocking on my door.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we think you'd be great to run against Aaron Schock. And me, like a dummy, not even realizing that I was totally getting played because there was no way in the world that I could have ever beat Aaron Chalk at that time.
No, Jesus Christ couldn't win in that district. Like,
but listen,
yeah.
but they told me, like, listen, you're the one, you can do it.
Well,
and
I mean, yeah.
And I believed it. And so I was going to run. And then the next thing you know, Ravenhood retired. Aaron Chalk decided to go to bigger and better things. And what was a loser race turned into a winner race.
There you go.
That's pretty awesome.
Yep.
So,
Well, I can't wait to see what other policies you get into. But
I don't have like a political family. I don't have a wealthy family. My family is super regular.
Your community. Yeah. That's where you're from, right? Peoria area.
100%. Born and raised, daughter of Peoria.
And you got 3 dispensary licenses coming in the first wave, which is going to be very, very exciting. And one of the things that we were talking about earlier is this whole social use regulations.
Yeah.
So what was the legislature's intention by drafting that?
Silent on it to allow municipalities to weigh in as they so fit, as they so chose.
With full social use.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. But give municipalities, again, that was enough trying to work with IML. We were silent on the issue in order to allow municipalities. So, municipality will choose, do you want social licenses or do you not want them?
So are you guys going to be having
and the reason why we did that was because all the other states, none of them started with social licenses. No state did. And so we were already going gangbusters on equity and stuff. Like, it was like, okay, we know social use is important. What we're going to do is we're going to be silent on the issue and allow communities to, if they want, the communities have to stand up and they have to articulate to their local elected officials why this is important. I think that we're probably, I believe Zion, Illinois is right now talking about doing social use. What's going to happen is the communities that do social use at the onset, what's going to happen is that folks are going to realize in other places that don't do it, they will realize the sky is not falling, that it's actually a really good revenue generator. And it's really smart policy because if we have now legalized a product that technically is illegal for someone to consume unless they own their own home. Because if you live in public housing, you cannot consume legally anywhere in Illinois. Unless you go to someone who owns their own home, if you are a renter, chances are in your rental agreement, you can't smoke cigarettes or marijuana as a part of your rental agreement. You can't smoke in public. So the reality of it is that, and as I shared with the city, is that what the city's doing by not doing social consumption is you are forcing law enforcement to have unnecessary engagement with the community that's not positive, right?
That's right.
So now law enforcement, because it cuts both ways. I'm not somebody who believes that people, listen, cannabis is not for everybody. There are many people that look at me and my family like, what the are you doing? Starting with like my father, who is almost, you've met my dad before, Tom. Like, yeah. My dad's almost 80 years old, stage 4 cancer. He gets prescribed opioid by the 200 count, but refuses to consume cannabis. Absolutely. He's reefer madness.
Right. He's been brainwashed. You say he's 80.
I tell all the time you're brainwashed.
Yeah.
I hate that for you, but you just got brainwashed, Dad. With that being said, folks should not be forced to have to live in a neighborhood and people walk around smoking cannabis all day, every day, if that's not what you're into. But the reality of it is we got to give people a place to do it.
Yeah.
So I don't think that people should be subjected to having to be around it. But I also don't want to see a situation where law enforcement is only focusing in on certain communities and finding and feeing to death certain communities when this is happening. So I just think that the lack of social consumption is a glaring problem waiting to happen.
Yeah. Miggy, over in Washington State, you guys were one of the leaders in legal cannabis, and you've had, I think it's just celebrated your 5th anniversary in the state of adult use. Tell us about how they're approaching social use in Washington.
We're still trying to tackle the problem. There's nothing on the books, and I was going to ask you about what is your social use right now in the medical. For me, it was surprising to hear that you have a medical license. Like when Washington State, when we did our medical, it was more of a, all right, everybody's magically now in the medical business, get a prescription. And then if you want to open a storefront, get a loan, do all your stuff, you'll have to get a city business license. But there was no medical structure, no medical licensee type stuff. And I think that was the downfall of our whole recreational side, or for medical, because now there's no medical.
So like that's what you're saying. It's the difference between the ballot initiative and then the difference between a full legislative session that bangs out a 600-page statute.
Yeah.
I mean, what we did is no offense to Washington, what we did was much harder to do. And a lot of states can't, like New York couldn't do it. Like, we tried to help New York and they couldn't do it. Part of what Illinois had going for them is that, you guys are one of the pioneers. And one of the challenges, like, if you're first man through the door, you may get shot.
Yeah.
You were a pioneer in this space. And so there were mistakes that were made by other states that we were able to learn from. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's really that's the hard and cold of it, is that we were able to look at what happened in Washington and what happened in California, and we were able to learn from some of those mistakes, not just in recreational, but also in medical.
Well, even like you said, with the putting stuff on the books, I think is huge. If we're still fighting for home grow here, which, we're trying to correct that after 5-7 years. And the only reason why is kind of the same thing that you were saying, as far as like, we don't want the police to interact in a wrong way with somebody. I just want to have a rule that says I'm allowed to have 6 plants and no one's going to jump my fence, or I can call the cops and say, hey, someone came over and stole my plants that I was perfectly legally growing. We try and encourage, like, get rid of the prohibition, and then we can have proper policing, have proper interaction with the police force and whatnot. But right now, you're still being treated like a criminal if it's not in the books. Like with your social consumption, that'd be great to open a business and say, even in this shirt that I have right here, this Northwest Cannabis Market, they are a consumption place here in Washington when it was medical. Now the guy, because Washington, when they had the recreational laws, he moved to Oregon. He's got now a consumption place down in Oregon because Washington doesn't have anything on the books. We have one place in Washington that you can do consumption, and that's because a long time ago, this guy, Frankie's, he owns the land. And back to Tom Washington's my rights, my civil liberty type shit.
Right. Washington State is like Illinois if they had a sound and what do they call that stuff? Libertarianism.
Yeah. So Frankie fought on grounds of like, this is my land, my property type thing. And he's passed on, but his legacy in this, the way he wrote his will and all this other stuff, there's a place for us to safely consume without getting fucked with. But there's only one place in Washington State, and so we're still trying to go through our aches and pains, even though we do have, this is why I was asking about your present consumption in medical. We still have little things that we have a bus that'll show up sometimes, and that's where everybody dabs out.
Oh, that's right, the dab bus. When we were at Hemp Fest, I remember that vaguely.
Yeah. So, and how we get around that is like when people come on, they'll sign a waiver saying, okay, I am not only part of this party, and I'm involved into my personal party here. Fortunately, we're layers of paperwork just to have a good time in the open.
Yeah, they literally have a bus, Jehan.
We're pioneers, man.
Yeah,
it will not be like this in 10 years.
No.
Well, it'd be great. Like you said, you guys already got pretty much 80% of what you need to have a great legal recreational program for everybody, in my opinion. Worked
really hard on it.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing.
I still think we don't have enough numbers of licenses. How is the supply going to work out, you think?
We'll have to see. I told you, like, there's the demand study showed 45% of the market. For this 45% of the market will be able to be met by the current folks in the space. So that's day one, and then you'll have folks that'll come in the next wave. After the first wave, there'll be a hard lid that goes on. There'll be a hard lid that goes on us. We'll take a look at the market, see what the market looks like. Is the market diverse? Is it not diverse? The market's not diverse. July 1, 2020, there'll be a disparity study that will then look to be able to right wrongs before the market is saturated. And then we'll continue on in waves and do it through slow growth. I mean, here's the thing, guys. Like, alcohol was legalized in 29.
33, something like that. I think it was 33.
Yeah, 13 years.
So somewhere in that range, right? So just this past session, we passed the gallonage bill. So we've been, and every year I've been in the General Assembly, we've passed bills dealing with alcohol every year. And I've been here 10 years now. The bills dealing with cannabis will be passed long after all four of us are dead and gone.
Oh yeah, and that's what we discuss a lot on here on this Cannabis Legalization News podcast. We always say, like, you know, hey, legalization of cannabis seems like really cool and like justice and everything, but it's basically a 7th grade civics lesson where you're learning how laws are made, and then that's what we're getting to next is the amendments. And so, like,
listen, this is not the end. I mean, this is the beginning.
Yeah,
this is the beginning of the industry. There literally will be. By the end, so we're going into 2020. By the end of this decade, there will be hundreds of cannabis bills that get introduced over the next decade. Hundreds. So, you know, I mean, are we going to get everything in this one bill? And mind you, this bill is 610 pages. There's just no way. Like, no different than we're still making challenges. We're still making changes to the Alcohol Act. So it's going to always be a living, breathing thing.
Well, especially with the national conversation, as that keeps growing, then you're going to have to change your state conversation. Because I don't know if you guys saw, but there's a bunch of Northeast governors that are going to be gathering together, New York, Massachusetts, you know, and trying to talk about legalization. So, I mean, if you get that little pocket of a corner of America all slit over, and then you guys, you know.
Well, I think the Safe Banking Act, when you can actually, because banks are still very, very reluctant to even get an account. And so you have to be careful with how you deal with your bank account, but then also it's having an account is different than having a loan. So, like, you know, you can have a checking account and only money in the checking account is how much you have. But if you have a loan and you can access collateral and you can access debt markets, that really will bring down the barriers of entry. I mean, imagine if every pizzeria, because it was illegal to bank pizza, let's say, they had to all raise in cash. That's ridiculous. But that's what we're doing with cannabis, and it's still growing this fast.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yep.
Yeah, and then with that Safe Banking Act, it'll also probably help the intercommerce, you know, when that happens one day, you know.
Oh, it's going to be a game changer.
Yep.
Right? It'll be a game changer. And I think that here in Illinois, because we have the gold standard in medical, so the businesses that open up here are going to be very well positioned.
All right.
Because reputation in this space is very good. We're considered the gold standard in the industry nationally as it relates to medical. And then the way that we crafted the recreational cannabis legalization bill, we have the most equity-centered bill in the country. And so as we are moving into a world by which we are talking about the issues of equity and inequality, like, those issues are not going to die down anytime soon. It's not a fad. It's a thing that companies, industries, politicians, business leaders are going to have to get in tune to. It is what it is. And so here in Illinois, you will have companies that are forced to deal with the very highly recognized seed to sale tracking that we have in Illinois, but then also having workforce and hopefully ownership that is reflective of the state. And so we will be viewed as very wise investments as this goes national. Mm-hmm. So our folks are going to be very well positioned here in Illinois.
And that's another thing about the wise investment part, as far as your requirement to be a state resident, I think is huge to help your program.
Yep. Hey, we actually have a question. Hey, Lauren, let's.
Yeah,
I'm gonna be moving.
All right.
we have a question from Victoria Deschong. What will be discussed in the trailer bill?
Well,
It's still under discussion.
Is there any
Like
any
more-
details we can give?
No.
Okay.
Mostly, just being honest. Mostly,
Yeah.
mostly technical changes. Yeah.
Did you guys?
Mostly tech.
We have
Can you hear
another
me?
question from an engineering cannabis.
Mostly technical changes.
Mhm.
But those conversations will certainly continue to change and develop. Like there are meetings weekly about the issue. So
Excellent. And then
yeah, I listen. I just don't want. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Right?
I get it.
So,
I get it.
not that I'm trying to be cutesy, but I just.
Well, let's look backward then, because one of our viewers asked, how much influence did you use Canadian cannabis framework in drafting the Illinois laws, or did you only look at other states?
Yeah, I didn't. I personally didn't view any of the Canadian laws. I personally did not. I'm not saying. Well, go give her a hug then. Sorry, guys.
They're good.
I did not. I can't say that Kelly or Heather or Toy didn't, but I did not.
Well, that was great, but I mean, like, I wanted to thank you. We've gone for about 50 minutes, which is usually about as long as we do these. So I'm going to let Lauren wrap up the show.
Yeah, before we go, Jehan, is there anywhere we can follow you and see what's going on?
Oh yeah, definitely. Oh crap, I should have this down pat. You can follow me on Instagram at Jehan Gordon-Booth, Jehan Gordon. You can follow me on Twitter at RepJGB, or you can follow me on Facebook at Jehan Gordon-Booth.
Awesome, thank you. And Nikki, where can we follow you?
WeNews.co, and I just want to thank Jehan again for joining us and being such a badass.
Yeah.
Oh my God, thank you. This was a lot of fun. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but thank you for helping me update my phone. Listen, you guys are incredibly tech savvy because I had no clue what you were talking about most of the time. But thank God for those good old screenshots.
Those worked. We got around this. I tell you,
Yes. I felt like I was being. I felt like it was like this is a Comcast call, and I was trying to figure out how to get my router working or something.
Very true.
But we worked.
It worked.
Everything worked out. And Tom, where can we find you and follow you?
You just got to Google cannabis lawyer or about anything on the Illinois law, and you'll find me real quick.
Excellent. Well, Jehan, thank you so much for joining us again. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next Wednesday. Make sure you like and subscribe.
Bye, everybody. Thank you,
Later.
Jehan.